So welcome everyone and to this webinar organized in the context of the Climateurope2 project. Climateurope2, for those that don't know about it, is a coordination and support action with the aim to support the climate services community and also to propose standardization procedures for future equitable and quality assured climate services. My name is Marta Terrado. I'm involved in the Climateurope2 project and I'm based at the Barcelona Supercomputing Center in Spain. I will be moderating this webinar together with my colleague Ines Martín del Real, who has been doing a lot of work behind the scenes. And during this webinar, she will take care of the chat box. This is the second webinar of what we call Stakeholders Perspective webinar series, in which we aim to understand the needs related to climate services and the standardization thereof, from the point of view of different groups of stakeholders. While the first webinar was focused on the perspectives of the private sector, on this occasion, we will hear about the perspective of the science communication and journalism sectors. We will discuss with two invited speakers about good practices in these sectors and how making them more generalized can improve the uptake of climate information and also enhance its understanding by different types of audiences. To discuss about these topics, we have two panelists that we have invited. Vera Penêda from the European Journalism Center and Vladimir Djurdjevic from the University of Belgrade. The webinar will be divided in two different parts. During the first part, we will have presentations from the two speakers, after which you will be able to ask your questions. During the second part, we will then introduce 4 different topics of relevance for climate communication, and we will listen to the opinion of the panelists, and especially to your opinion, the opinion of the audience. For that, we encourage you to ask questions in the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen in Zoom, and you can decide. We can either read your questions for you, but if you wish to speak, you can address the questions to the speakers directly. What you have to do is just write an asterisk next to your question, and then we will unmute your microphone and you will be able to speak. Okay, I will shortly introduce the speakers in a proper way, but before that, we would like to run a short Mentimeter, just to know who is in the audience and also some of the details of your daily activities. So the first question, as I told you, is about who's in the room. We want to know to whom we are addressing the speech today, because as I said, this webinar is very focused on communication and journalism, but many times we have more researchers in the room, which is totally fine. But yeah, it's good to know to whom we are speaking to. Okay, so by now we have a lot of science communicators, either researchers or practitioners. We have also a lot of researchers, a few journalists, and I can even see a few members of the private sector as well. And we have one policy and public sector and one other. Perhaps if the couple of others want to write on the chat from which sector they are from, this would be also useful for us to know a little bit more about you. Okay, perhaps we can go to the next question. So the next question is about which audiences do you primarily target in your communication? We have kept this in your communication quite broad because perhaps some of you normally write news pieces, but others can be preparing other types of material. So yeah, whatever you do, for whom it is. You can choose more than one answers here. So yeah, if you are communicating to 2 or 3 different audiences, feel free to select them all. Okay, so we have scientific community. There are a lot of people communicating to them, but beyond the climate community. Then we have also a lot of people communicating to the general public, some of you to the climate science community, which makes sense as well. Some of you also to policymakers, and then it comes the private sector professionals, environmental and climate activists, and other. Yeah, for other, I repeat the same. If there are some audiences that we didn't put here, but perhaps it's good to know that you are communicating to them, please write them in the chat and we have this information as well. Okay, and then if you want, Ines, we can move to the next question, which is, what topics do you communicate about most frequently in your daily work? And here we have tried to cover different topics, climate change and its impacts, floods, droughts, heat waves and cold waves, emissions and greenhouse effect, storms and hurricanes, climate policy, and then we have the category other, as before. You can also select more than one option here. So the major part I see about climate change and its impacts, which makes sense because it's a very wide category and it encompasses lots of topics. And then the rest of categories are not so different. So we have climate policy, some people, a lot of others as well. And then emissions and greenhouse gases and floods and droughts. Okay. So the list, the storms and hurricanes. And we go now to the next question, which is, which task do you spend more time with for the preparation of communication pieces? Here we want to know, to what do you devote more time? And we have finding and verifying information, then another category about cleaning and analyzing the data, expanding climate information with other complementary types of information, and adopting the look and adapting, the look and feel of the graphics and other. Yeah, it seems here that categories don't differ that much. We have the winning one, it's finding and verifying the information, but then the rest of the workload is split between the other three categories more or less, and other as well. So yeah, feel free also to let us know in the chat which other things do you have in mind in terms of daily workload. Okay, and I think we have a pretty good now image of who's in there. We have another one. Okay, so the last one, I think, it's what resources do you draw from to keep yourself up to date about climate change? So where do you get the information, the data, or whatever you use? Again, if you say other, please let us know. But for now, I see that recurring climate information sources like the IPCC, NASA, CCRC, and so on are the winning ones. And very close to them are expert direct contact and follow some experts on social media accounts. And this is followed by journal publications and climate data portals. Okay. So yeah, thanks a lot. I think we need to move on now. And we will now introduce our speakers so they can give the presentations that they have prepared for today. Let me first introduce Vera Penêda. Vera is the Director of Programs and Impact at the European Journalism Center. She's a journalist with a huge experience with international NGOs and major news organizations all around the world. Vera has designed and developed a myriad of training, grant, and accelerator programs at the intersection of journalism and innovation at the European Journalism Center to help newsrooms and journalists across Europe adapt to the new challenges and become more resilient. So without further ado, Vera, the floor is yours, and feel free to share your screen when you are ready.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Marta, for that introduction, and thank you for having me. So let's start. Bear with me for a minute. I'm going to share my screen, and let me make sure I'm in the right slide here. Thank you for joining at this early morning. And I was glad to see that there's a lot of science communicators in the room. So I think we're good to go. Can you give me a thumbs up that you are seeing the presentation?
Yes.
Yeah, all good. Perfect. So let me see if I can also, yes, I can move along through the slides. So we're ready to go. Perfect. So I don't need to present myself, but I would like to let you know a little bit about what the European Journalism Center does, right? And why we are here. So we are a center based in Maastricht in the south of the Netherlands. And our main mission is to support journalists and media organizations across Europe. And we do this by creating programs that help them in several ways. We have a group of programs that we call our climate portfolio that includes grants for climate investigations, that includes accelerator programs to help the media organizations step up and be better at covering climate change and telling climate stories or reaching new audiences with these narratives. We also promote a lot of events that bring together scientists and journalists, researchers, activists, people working on the NGO landscape as well, to discuss best practices and find ways to collaborate and make sure that the climate narratives are getting to the people, getting to general public. So I was one of the people who mentioned the general public in the Mentimeter, because that would be our main audience. But of course, within the general public, you have all sorts of audiences, right? And you have diplomacy makers. If we think about the big media outlets like The Guardian, The New York Times, Le Monde, these are the media outlets that policymakers usually read. But then you also have young audiences that nowadays get all their information through social media. And a lot of you mentioned also in the Mentimeter, you voted that you follow experts on social media. So this is what we do. And what I bring today to share with you is an overview of the main challenges that we have. So I speak on behalf of journalists and media organizations for reporting on climate change. What are these challenges? And then what do we need to overcome these challenges? So we're going to talk about needs and barriers. We're going to talk about the advantages of standardizing some of the solutions to access the information we need and to tell better climate stories. And I'm going to show some interesting, some funny videos even, that can inspire us so that we go back to our work, whatever it is, communicating around the science of climate change or news, or, reaching whoever you want to reach with your information. So let's start. And first of all, I would like to tell you about the challenges, right? So I think that reporting on climate change has proven uniquely challenging for journalists and science communicators, because we need to navigate very complex data. And this data is rapidly evolving, because climate change that is the nature of climate change. And there is a spectrum of public perceptions as well that affects the way that we need to report on the topic. So some of the biggest challenges we face are precisely this. First of all, climate science involves complex models, projections, data analysis that are very difficult to translate into language that everyone understands, right? And so the journalists have to gather this information, interpret this information. They have to avoid oversimplifying it, but they have also to make it relevant and understandable to everyone. So this is a huge task, right? I included a lot of musts in this sentence. Another one is communicating scientific uncertainty without undermining the urgency of the topic, right? So science often, it's not black and white. Journalists usually really like to explain things black and white, but science is not in that way. It is funded on probabilities, uncertainties, and so communicating these nuances can be very tricky, especially in our environment that is at the moment a very polarizing environment everywhere we look, right? If we look at the US elections, that is going to take a lot of the attention of the world today. We see how polarizing it has been, right? So the narratives and the topics in the media also suffer with that. And journalists must convey the urgency of climate change without giving the impressions that scientists are uncertain about the reality and about the risks. And the fact of the matter is that climate science, over 90% of it, I don't have the exact percentage, but over 90% of it has been confirmed, right? That's why usually, and I like to think that most of us in the room are not moving towards the denialism, right? Then we have combating misinformation and climate denialism. As you know, climate misinformation is widespread, and it's often amplified by very well-funded sources or social media, and this affects, fuels public misunderstanding. So this is probably one of the biggest challenges that we currently have. Journalists cannot spend our entire time debunking myths, right? Because otherwise we do not report any stories. We just go and do fact checking and debunking. But we do need to find ways to confront denialist narratives and counteract misleading information that is populating social media and all the spaces where we get our information from. Then I mentioned this one already, is difficult to keep up with the rapid evolving science and the policies, right? It means you have to read constantly. It means technology is advancing quickly. And right now we are in the midst of an AI revolution. And you all know this will have also consequences on sustainability, on climate change. And this space really requires journalists to stay updated with everything that are new research findings, changes in the policy, innovations in clean energy. So we're talking about continuous education and adaptation. And then number 5, I mentioned there, finding a balance between local and global narratives. It's also very important, and why this happens. So we are both affected by climate change at a local level, in our communities, in our families, in our neighborhoods, but also at the global level. But if we keep talking about the global consequences, this will create a disconnect with people because it seems very far away from their reality, right? So we must try our best not to abstract the concepts too much to local audiences, and we have to focus on stories that can show the magnitude of the problem at the level of these people's daily lives, even for people to understand how they are affected, how their neighbors, their children will be affected or are being affected already by this. I changed slides, so if you have questions, I understand there's time for questions at the end, but please make sure to include them in the chat. And then we move on to another set, right, where maintaining public interest is difficult because climate change happens over time. So unless there are extreme events like the ones that happened last week and even yesterday in Spain with the floods and the rains, it's very difficult to make sure that climate change remains in our target and it remains on the home pages and the pages of all the media, right? But we cannot forget that is very urgent at the same time, and that is happening every day. So this is what we call a slow-moving crisis. Climate change is a slow-moving crisis, right? And this is also creating, on the other hand, some climate fatigue. People are tired of being bombarded by 24-hour reports, and I'm talking about big stations that do coverage of immediate news, right? You have BBC, you have CNN, and you see sometimes you have the broadcasters in your countries, the public broadcasters, how they spend the entire day reporting on climate disasters and hazards. It is very tiring for people. So we need to find ways to cut through this and still inform in an engaging manner. It's always important to explain the economic and social implications of climate change. So this means that journalists also need to learn a lot about the context and make connections between what's happening in different countries and with different stakeholders. So it's a rather complex network of implications that journalists and science communicators need to learn to make sure that they bring the stories to the fore with explaining the entire context. Then addressing solutions without giving a false sense of security. Again, we need to strike a delicate balance here, right? Because we need to report on climate solutions like renewable energy, sustainable practices, right? To avoid what we call the doom and gloom narratives. However, if we focus too much on solutions, this can make our audiences complacent. It can suggest that climate issues are being sufficiently addressed. So this is yet another challenge. I briefly mentioned political polarization and ideological divides. So climate change is very much politically polarized, especially in certain parts of the world. So reporting on climate science in a way that reaches across these political divides requires a lot of sensitivity, avoiding language that is too charged and can alienate certain groups on society. So we need to frame the climate stories in terms of health, security, economic opportunities, again, providing that context that mentioned before. And finally, managing personal bias and psychological toll. Journalists covering climate change, they often grapple with feelings of hopelessness and anxiety, as well as potential biases from our own environmental views, right? We are all, none of us is free of bias because we are a product of our education, a product of our upbringing, our circumstances. But it's important to report in a neutral manner as much as possible, but while also handling the emotional weight of this topic, right? Interviewing people who have been affected by climate disasters and have lost everything, and doing this work constantly has a strong psychological toll on science and climate communicators. So burnout is a real risk. There's a lot of conversation around climate anxiety among young people, just coming out of consuming the news and all the information around climate change. So this is yet another challenge. And if we move forward, I included here, we're not going through all of them in detail because we will be able to share the presentations at the end, right? But for you to have an idea then, what are the barriers at the moment that to the use of climate information that's making our work as journalists and science communicators harder? And at the top, of course, we have access to high quality information, right? So access to reliable, timely climate data is really essential, but it's difficult to acquire. It's not easy to find it. Many scientific databases or climate models are restricted, are paywalled, or they require a technical expertise to be interpreted that not everyone has, right? So this is a strong barrier here. And this limits all our abilities to report on current data and to contextualize the climate impacts that we mentioned. It needs to be done to make stories better understood by people. So what do we need here? And the matching need is open access to climate data repositories, research articles, and simplified tools for analysis, right? So if you are working on this realm as a researcher, for example, finding ways to make your research more accessible or collaborating with the media organizations and journalists would be great. Then we have the complexity of the data. It's difficult to translate the technical data into accessible language, right? And so I've heard from both sides. Scientists want to be very thorough, very meticulous communicating the data, and that is super important, right? And they sometimes complain that journalists distort the data, right? And try to explain it in a very definite way that this is the data, it's not going to change. And on the other side of the spectrum are journalists telling scientists that sometimes it's like they speak a different language that is not from this world, right? And it's difficult for the general public to understand. So data visualization tools can really help both fields, but honestly, the partnerships and that collaboration between scientists and journalists are more and more necessary, right? So this takes us also to the lack of climate reporting training. So it's really important that journalists and science communicators have access to training to learn on how to the best ways to explain climate change, to communicate. We have the barrier of the climate fatigue from doom and gloom that I mentioned before, and we are going to look into some strategies that are solution oriented and can help mitigate this climate fatigue as well. And of course, there's always funding and resource constraints, right? Because I did not come prepared with a pitch, but organizations, like the European Journalism Center, we like to think that we provide a lot of support, but there's need for more, and we can't do more because the grants are not available. The financial support is not available. And this has to do with the commitment, a worldwide commitment that you see happens at the COPs as well, and it's going to happen next week at the next COP. They are going to discuss financial measures to improve and mitigate climate change, but it's far from what is being used, for example, for arsenals around the world. So it needs to make us think about this. And there's more. I wish there weren't, but there are many more barriers, like the need for localized data. And this is something, for example, that we've discussed with Marta and Ines and in previous meetings of Climateurope2, that it would be wonderful, of course, for journalists and science communicators to have access to regional data that then they can compare to data in other parts of Europe or in other parts of the world, to be able to explain climate change in a way that makes it understandable to everyone. There are, of course, political and legal pressures. And I should mention that climate journalists and activists are at the forefront of a lot of danger and a lot of risk when they want to report on climate change, when they want to investigate big lobby groups, when they unveil illegal practices that are harming the environment for all of us. They get arrested, they get arrested, and they get killed. This is the reality of the matter. Last year was one of the deadliest years for climate journalists and activists around the world. So, telling stories about the climate, we are here discussing this in a very laid back manner. But the fact of the matter is that can get people killed. And has extreme consequences to a lot of people in the world. Then we have distrust in reliable sources, and you have the example of the COVID-19 pandemic that has shown us that even when the best prepared institutions around the world talk and speak out to tell us about the dangers of a pandemic, many of them were disregarded. They were disregarded by the general public, and they were disregarded by certain governments when it was convenient. So we are indeed in a very sensitive context when everyone needs to step up in the way that we report about climate to make sure it is transparent, it's not fueled by polarizing language, it's not partisan reporting as well, right? So climate and mis and disinformation, I think we've covered it, and also the emotional toll on climate communicators. And actually, I should add the general public there, because of the crisis that I see more and more in the news among young people and how they are affected by the fears that climate change inspires. So I guess this is the good part of the conversation, right? Because we're going to look at good practices, what can be done and has already been done or is being put in place to make sure that we report better on the climate. Many organizations, media organizations, and science communicators are pioneering practices that make climate reporting more accessible, accurate, and engaging. Solutions-oriented narratives is one of them, right? So this is not about telling just positive stories and funny stories about climate change, is not that, but it is trying to understand what is already being done in the field by people that are working to counter the effects of climate change or mitigate them, and exploring in our stories if this is working or not, right? But this does provide a sense of hope and agency to people. These solutions-oriented narratives also include pointers on how people, we can call it tips, on how people can be active in their own communities to protect their environment, or to make sure, you know, that the people in power are held to account wherever they live. Then we have, of course, partnerships and collaborations. And we see that when journalists and scientists work together is mainly to make sure that the information is accurate. But we also see more and more journalists and working with content creators, or media organizations working with content creators that are often known as influencers, to make sure the stories reach new audiences. And, I'm talking about climate scientists, neuroscientists, meteorologists that do very well on social media and have found ways to reach young audiences, or women or minorities that usually don't open, media outlets' homepage or newspapers to get their news. We will see about creative storytelling tools, and I don't need to talk about how graphics and images, satellite images, for example, are so good to convey the effects of climate change. I'm sure you have seen this week images of Valencia, that was the Spanish city that was hit by the flash floods, before and after the floods. So the European Space Agency has a lot of those photos available, and it's quite impressive to see the effect. So using this type of visuals really helps people understand the effects of climate change. Science-based language standards and climate style guides will also look at one example. One of the most interesting in the media landscape is the fact that The Guardian, a few years ago, let me put on screen, decided to start talking about climate crisis instead of climate change, because they said this is past the time to talk about a change. We all know and can feel that the environment, the weather is changing. We now need to talk about a climate crisis to really show the urgency. So language is really important here. And on the other side, you have an example of solutions reporting from the BBC Future Planet. It's a section of the BBC that is specifically dedicated to telling climate stories. And as you can see, it is with a very positive tone. It's a great story talking how a community of women are farming sea sponges in Zanzibar. And this helps save the oceans and biodiversity, marine biodiversity, but at the same time provides for women a financial independence that is very much needed in a context like Zanzibar. So it's a story here that mixes climate change and gender, but with a very positive tone. So let me go back for a second. We were here. Localized reporting on climate impacts. This has also been mentioned before. If I keep talking about the effects of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere without explaining to people how that is going to affect their daily life, their health, for example, how they transport themselves to work, the air they breathe every day, how they recycle in their communities. I am not explaining enough for people to understand how this relates to them. These are also good practices. So engaging communities through participatory processes. There's a lot of this being done. For example, the New York Times invites people to go to their headquarters in New York to discuss, how their communities and their lives are affected by climate change. And I'm talking about the New York Times, but I can talk about, a media outlet in Lisbon called Mensagem, that is much smaller, as you can imagine. It's a local media outlet serving a city that does exactly the same thing. So it's very important to involve people in this process, to engage them, to generate trust. The same thing, taking journalism and reporting off the platforms and closer to people. I know Vladimir is going to talk about this better, but for us in the media landscape, this means, transforming journalistic stories into a theater play or a photo exhibition and taking it to a global forum like the COP, for example, so that people can experience what has been told over 30 stories of 30 journalistic stories or a year of investigations, right? So again, if the problem of mis and disinformation is on the platforms, let's take the stories off the platforms and closer to the people. I also mentioned, as part of solutions reporting, pointing people towards resources and self-care tips is important. Young audiences are very permeable to this. They really search online, and there is research showing how many times climate change is researched among young people, and they are looking for ways to keep healthy. They're looking for ways to help their communities as well. I mentioned the training and the climate literacy resources already, and using fact-checking and misinformation filters. So this solution here, number 10, is more for media outlets, NGOs, and science communicators, but everyone needs to do a little bit of fact-checking and making sure that is getting their climate information. There's a bit of individual responsibility here in understanding that you're getting your climate information from reliable sources, right? So it's good to compare information, to read The Guardian as much as you read your local news outlet online. It can be online as much as you follow a climate scientist on Instagram. So we've been through this example, and I really like the Guardian's example because it also goes into standardization of that we are going to mention a bit further ahead, why it's important to standardize the language that we use to communicate on climate, right? So the Guardian changed its style guide in 2019, and soon after that, AP, so the Associated Press, another press agency, and Reuters, so we're talking about three of the most important media and agencies, news agencies across the world, made changes to their style guides, right? So instead of climate emergency, they used climate crisis. Instead of climate denier, they started saying climate science denier, which is very interesting as well. And also, instead of climate skeptic, they stopped talking about climate skeptics, and they made sure that we were saying that these people were denying science, right? So this is a very good example of the use of science-based language, but also standardization of services for climate information. Then I want to talk about partnerships and collaborations, and to show a video. I hope the video shows well. This is a collaboration between Earthrise Studio that I recommend you follow on Instagram, which is an hybrid between a media outlet and the communications organization. And they teamed up with Oxfam, an NGO that I believe is well known to everyone, to put out a series of 5 episodes to explain how climate intersects with other issues. So they chose to talk about climate change in connection to health, conflict, class, gender, and colonialism. So we're going to watch a little bit of the episode 1.
What if there was this incredible solution to helping fight climate change, but we aren't paying enough attention? Hint, it's gender equality. Women and girls often experience the worst impacts of the climate crisis, with drastic consequences for their health, livelihoods, and education. But they're often not included in the solutions. That's because climate change and gender equality are deeply intertwined. Here's why.
Climate change, of course, affects everybody, but you'll find it affects women and girls differently.
Especially those in lower income countries and those living in poverty or fleeing conflict. Women are the backbone of the community. They're relied upon to secure food, water, and fuel. And they produce up to 80% of food in lower income countries. That means women's security is often connected to natural resources, which are vulnerable to changing weather patterns and climate shocks. And in the chaos following a flood, cyclone, or other climate disaster, risk of gender-based violence increases and access to healthcare decreases. When resources become scarce, essential tasks like collecting water can become more dangerous and time-consuming. And girls often have to pay the price.
All of a sudden, she can't go to school. And we know how education is really important for girls. Like when you educate a girl, you educate a whole community. So that already starts to cause inequality because boys will continue to go to school.
This has long-term impacts. For example, women are underrepresented in climate policy and decision-making roles that shape the future we all share. But women around the world still show remarkable resilience in fighting climate change. Imagine what could be achieved with equal access to education.
Educating girls is such a ripple effect. It is like an instant solution. They can also be advocates of climate change and be leaders and be able to influence decisions.
Another world is necessary, another world is possible.
And looking at climate through a gender lens isn't just about women. Climate risks are more severe for disadvantaged groups, like Indigenous women, LGBTQ people, migrants, and those living in conflict or disaster zones. Men also experience unique hazards from climate change, such as often being the last to receive aid.
Important for all of us to come together, for nations to come together. And I think it also includes for women and men to come together. They also become agents. They also fight for girls. So girls are part of the solutions. They deserve a seat at the table when this climate discussion is happening.
So investing in gender equality is crucial to addressing climate change.
I hope that wasn't too long. I really wanted to show the entire episode for specific reasons. So when these episodes were published, they were thought of to be published on YouTube, on Instagram, on TikTok. So as you know, short form video is very important in this platform. So we have a 3-minute video. In 3 minutes, you have a person that guides you through the story. It's very, very visual, very little text. All the story is anchored on key data. So you see some percentages showing on screen, right? And this is what is working on social media to tell people about a very important issue. So it may seem very easy to put together, but if you see that, if you see here, it's a result of a collaboration between an NGO, a media organization funded by the European Union, by the way, and all these people that are listed there worked on this. The language was very neutral, if we can say that, right? Because there is an agenda, obviously, to put here, to show the intersection of climate and gender as an issue, but very much oriented to solutions as well, right? In the video, all the solutions were laid down. Education is certainly one. Supporting girls and women is another one. it also included men, as you could see, as agents and supporters of women and girls. So this is a really good example. I hope we enjoyed it. And
what if there was this incredible solution
this
to helping fight climate change, but we aren't?
I want to move on to the next slide. Exactly. So here we have an example of another video. We're not going to watch it until the end because this one is 10 minutes long. But the contrast here is that this was done by Deutsche Welle, which is a public broadcaster. So you will see also a very visual manner of explaining an issue that affects everyone, by the way. Phone batteries, we all know what this is about. We all know that they cause a lot of trash, technological trash, right? And again, the topic, the headline is already pointing at solutions, right? And with a question that to really engage the audience, can your phone battery help to solve one of the world's biggest problems? Let's take a look and then we comment a little bit.
Excuse me, Vera, sorry. Would it be possible to share the link perhaps on the chat so people can watch it? It's just on the interest of time, we should move on to the next presentation.
Okay,
That's why.
Yes, of course. I am very happy to share the link on the chat. No problem at all. You will be able to see this on your own time. And this is yet another one. This is by an influencer. This is very short. Is it okay to show this one to kind of close?
Okay, if we are closing, go ahead.
It's New York Climate Week and I'm not there. And before you start, I was invited. I definitely would have had to fly. And as a climate scientist, I know that flying is one of the most polluting things we can do. And yes, climate change is a structural problem, but that's shaped by richer people emitting more by doing stuff like flying. Now, I'm not sharing this for your validation, though. I'll gladly take it. But honestly, I get huge FOMO when I turn down events like this. And I'm not saying I'll never fly again, but where I can, I choose not to. And I'm lucky I can often take the train, like I did last weekend to interview a Swiss climate activist. I make these personal choices because they have the power to create societal shifts, especially if we share what we're doing. So why don't you share too? How do you help our climate and how could this change society? Have fun in New York, everyone.
A 40-second clip by a climate scientist. His name is Climate Adam. He's on all the usual platforms, and I recommend that you follow. There's examples of humor as well, because these are helping with eco-anxiety, and that's why I wanted to include them in the presentation, but you will also be able to digest them a little bit more when I share the slides. And the potential for standardizing good practices, again, this is to read later, right? But really, why we want to make sure that there is let's say, a North Star, right? That we know the type of language we use, the type of fact-checking protocols. This is all to build accuracy, to build trust, to build resilience in our audience. You can call it climate literacy as well, accessibility and comprehension to the stories that we want to share. And honestly, this is something that we are already doing, right, at the European Journalism Center, like I mentioned before. So we create communities of practices, we publish best practice guidelines and language guides that can help you tell climate stories. We encourage a lot of collaborative projects and partnerships. And the slides that come next, are how we do it, basically. This is the journalists we trained in a journalism festival in Greece last year. This year we returned precisely to talk about partnerships between NGOs and media organizations. Last year, one of our major events was done in partnership with the European Space Agency and the Euro-Mediterranean Center on Climate Change, which is also a partner of the Barcelona Supercomputing Center for several activities. We give out a lot of grants with generous support of the European Commission. We do programs, to make sure that people who are in decision-making positions in media outlets can change the ways these stories are told. This is the event that we do every year. We had it in Denmark. It was really fantastic. A room full of journalists, scientists, activists, and what you get in a day, what you get done in a day in person, it's quite impressive. If you compare, of course, you know, I love webinars, and we all know this is very effective when we cannot travel and to make our activities more affordable. But meeting in person is really, really important to work in collaborations and partnerships. We have a podcast as well, Conversations with Data, that always interviews, you know, specialists. This one was shown before. And this is what I mentioned in the beginning that we do, right? So you can find us on ejc.net or follow the newsletter if you're interested, because more and more we have science communicators also participating in our activities to find the right journalists and the right media organizations to collaborate with. And I'm done. I'm sorry if I was a bit over time.
A little bit, but it's fine. It was very interesting. Thanks, Vera, for sharing all these good practices, also the barriers that you have encountered, and to give such particular examples so people can better understand in which context do you experience that. You have a few questions on the chat, but I would suggest that in the interest of time, you have a look at them. I think you can see them. And then to answer to people, and we will make sure to collect these questions and answers and share them with the audience after the webinar. So we can move now with the presentation of Vladimir. Vladimir Djurdjevic is our next speaker. He's a full professor at the Faculty of Physics in the University of Belgrade. Vladimir's research area includes numerical climate modeling, climate data analysis, risk and vulnerability assessment, and climate change adaptation issues. And Vladimir has been a visiting scientist at the NOAA in the US, CMCC in Italy, IST in Portugal, and ICOT in Malta. He's currently leading the Extremes project funded by the Science Fund from the Republic of Serbia. And he's also the co-founder of the Green Art Incubator Initiative and a collaborator of the Clima 101 portal. So Vladimir, I see, feel free to share your screen because it was yes now. And
thank you, Marta. Okay, now the famous question, can you see my presentation?
Not yet.
Not yet, okay. Let me try this way. And now?
Still no, I cannot see it.
Sorry. Sorry.
Now it seems it comes, yes.
Now it's okay?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, I will try to be fast and short, just to have a little bit time for conversation with the audience later, because one of my experiences in terms of communicating climate change is the moment when you start to talk with your audience or the people on a lecture or something like that. And also I would like to say sorry, but the people who were in Venice on Climate Europe festival this year, they will see almost the similar presentation I presented there. I will start with this figure. It's let's call the figure the headline figure from the IPCC. It's telling us how much the world can warm up to 2100, depending on that, how much we're gonna emit different greenhouse gases. And it's the future of the planet and the future of humanity, etc. And it's one of the most important pieces that climate scientists produce, in terms that we inform, using this information, we inform policymakers which path we should follow in the future. And for each of these paths, there is of course scenarios, and there is a different energy production policies and other policies relevant to the emissions of greenhouse gases. But what is interesting for me about this figure is that figure itself, the size of the figure is just few hundred kilobytes, and the data behind this figure is like 3 petabytes of data. And we can talk about this on many different levels, but for this presentation, I would say that the similar is when we talk about the communication on climate, because you need to leave behind a lot of information and data and try to focus on a small piece of our knowledge about the climate and try to present that knowledge and bring it closer to the people in their minds when they won't think about the data. But on another side, this kind of figures is produced for the last 30 plus years. Even we can talk about the 50 years in past when it was happened for the first time that, let's say, scientists produce these kind of figures telling us how the world is going to warm up in the future. So we have let's say, a long tradition producing this kind of information for policymakers. But unfortunately, all this data and petabytes behind us didn't produce any change in terms of how much CO2 we emit in the atmosphere and how much concentration of the CO2 in the atmosphere is rising. And probably this information that we produce for policymakers does not show us any kind of sensible result. And I would like to present that in this way. So we have politicians which are started climate negotiation. They had access to all this information the climate scientists produce. And after like a 30 plus years, that politicians they're going to be retired. And the situation will be the same as in the beginning. Of course, it's not the same. I've simplified right now, but in terms of CO2 is the same. Okay, so probably there is some kind of miscommunication between science, politics, general public, etc. So here, my role here will be to just give you an idea or just to present the unusual ways how I communicate the climate science in past few years. And I would like to say that this was intentional. I didn't plan to do this, but I will give you some examples how what was my experience in past several years about the communication of climate change, which is not this kind of scientific communication of climate change. But I also have contribution in this kind of scientific communication of climate change. This is I call it binary contributions. During my PhD, I developed the coupled regional climate model, and my group became the part of MedCordex initiative. And even you can find in this famous IPCC climate atlas, you will find the results from the models of our group. So in that sense, we as a group and me as a scientist, I have experience how to produce data, how to share data, how to put additional terabytes and gigabytes of data on servers to be used and to be shared and to be communicated. At least we hope that this data can help us to adopt the policies to try to tackle the climate change. But also I have, as I said, I have this different ways how I try to communicate the climate change, not in scientific way, but maybe it's more, let's say, a broader way to general public and to people who are interested in this topic, and also to the people who are maybe not interested in this topic, but to try to make them interesting in this topic. And I will share you these examples with you. I hope that it's going to be inspirational for you and to try to think how we can what are the ways that we can communicate this topic and the ways that are not so common. The first example is the short movie. I shoot a short movie, let's say, together with Center for the Promotion of Science in Belgrade. The director was Miloš Tomić, and the short movie is really short. It's like 5 minutes long, and it's a discussion between me and the young girl. So we are discussing the climate change. I was the one who created the script for the movie, but was really challenging to create this kind of discussion, because discussing climate change with the kids, it's not so easy, because we're talking about their future, and we should find a way how to explain the kids that the climate is changing and that it's something that happened in the future when they grow up, which is not probably encouraging for them. Another example is let's call this the short theater show, but it's not short theater show. It is called augmented lecture, and the idea is that on you have like a artist in front of audience, and you have scientists. In this case, it's a graffiti artist from Serbia, TKV, and a scientist is me. And we create some kind of, let's call it again, the small theater show about the climate change. And the main topic of this show was not the climate change. It was my struggle to explain people that 1 degree is too much. Okay, so it's one of the struggles that we have. When you said that the planet is warmer about 1 degree, majority of people are gonna tell you, okay, this is nothing. A few days ago, the temperature was like at 20 degrees lower than today, and what 1 degree really means. So during this show, I'm trying to explain to the people how it's hard for us to explain such a complicated things that, that 1 degree is really too much. So it's again, it's why I'm talking about this is because your topic should not. I mean, it's not should not, but it's not necessary to be some kind of hardcore stuff, scientific topic about some things. You can talk about your personal experiences in terms of different ways or different aspects of your job as a scientist. Another example is a climate capsule. It's really interesting projects. It's the result is collaboration of many people. You have artists who create this hyper-realistic sculpture. It's a guy who is sleeping, and then you have a narrative behind that guy. And if you want to see this guy, you should go into the van, which is totally dark, and then the guy will pop up and tell you a story from the future. So this is the guy who are telling you a story about the future. And we had really interesting reactions of this immersive nano theater show, let's say, and also the presentation of this theater show is a part of Climateurope2 project. So people who are coming to the festivals or other events of Climateurope2 probably will have chance to see the climate capsule. Another thing, I became the part of exhibition in Belgrade. This is really a long story, but in short, the two artists from Switzerland asked me about my predictions of future sky color. Okay, we are talking about the temperature, precipitation, winds, I don't know, sea level rise. But when somebody asks you how the color of the sky will change in the future due to the climate change, you first start to laugh, and after that you realize that you are not sure. And the sky of the color is something that we experience every day, and we don't even have like a regular measurement. The what blue is above our head and how we can measure this blue. And as I said, it's a long story, but again, it's a communication between artists and scientists about the topic connected to the climate change, and it's really interesting to become a part of I would like to say even the really complex artistic show. Then another of my experiences is this Green Art Incubator, is an initiative between artist producers, myself, and cultural institution. And what we are trying to do in Serbia is to put, let's say, green practices within the cultural institution. So if you have a theater, then what we can do in this theater to save energy and also to communicate these changes to the audience, okay, to save energy, to save materials, to try to have energy from renewable sources, etc. So it's, in terms of theater, it's not so hard, but in terms of shooting a movie, it's really hard. So there is a whole sector or scene of people who are trying to make this art and cultural production more greener, and probably some of you already have some kind of information about it, but you can explore it a little bit more probably. Another experience from my side is the Climate Poetry Night. It was really interesting. I done it with Ljiljana Ilić. She's a poet from Serbia, not only the poet, but also the poet. We read the poetry of Natalie Diaz. It's Indian poet from United States, specifically on water, but I translated in, but not translated in a way of standard translation, but on a way that I have conversation with Lilia how this poet can be understood as a hydrological cycle in the climate system, okay? And there was a audience there, and we also asked people to be proactive during this night. And even one of the ladies from the audience, they read his own poem about the nature and climate, etc. So it was very interesting, and that is the reason I would like to talk right now, because from this experience I learned that if you give people a chance to talk about the climate, but not on this technical scientific way, but on this kind of everyday life, emotional, what we are thinking about that, where we're walking, etc. When we start to talk in that way about the climate, it's totally different level in comparison of explaining the temperature increase, the Paris Agreement goals, the limitations, etc., etc., etc. Okay, and the last example that I show you, it's a climate horoscope. We created for a fun here on faculty and put it on our LinkedIn page. Okay, I will not explain how the climate horoscope works, because if you want to know about your future in the climate horoscope, you need to pay as for other horoscopes. And what was interesting, the news outlet from Serbia picked up that from our LinkedIn page, and they announced that from today you have this traditional horoscope, you have Chinese horoscope, you have Indian horoscope, and then you have the climate horoscope. So it was a news for a day or two. We even was invited to TV show to explain what the climate horoscope is. And why I am presenting this is that if you find, I mean, the horoscope is something that people are really interested in that. I cannot explain why, but people like horoscope. But if you pick up something what people likes and put climate in that, it can be really successful story in terms that you will pick up the minds of the people. And I will not explain the story, but few weeks ago, the horoscope was presented on the main square here in Belgrade, and people who are passing by and looking in these pictures here started to realize, look, the younger generations are too often hot and not the cool one in terms of science. So the people, we didn't even communicate with them the climate change. They realized that red colors becoming more and more often in these recent years. So in our, let's say, view of this, it really has the picture has a big role in terms to help people to go to conclusions by themselves, and not to explain them that climate becoming warmer and warmer. And that's it for me. The title of presentation, numbers are not enough, and now probably you will understand why I think that numbers are not enough. So I hope that we will now have some kind of chat and exchange of experiences and questions. Okay, thank you.
Thanks a lot, Vladimir, for your presentation. Very interesting. We were commenting that we also get interested about the horoscope. So we also like it. We don't know why, but yes.
Okay.
And we have a couple of questions, but I would also suggest to answer you in the chat, because, for instance, the first one relates a little bit to the question that will come now and about which we will ask the speakers to comment on. So they are related, and for the sake of time, I think it's also good to move on. And yeah, you have a couple, Vladimir, from Justine and Xavi Domingo. So yeah, let's move in this last part. We will have two people from the project that will contribute, introducing a couple of topics, and also running a Mentimeter. We will start by a first question on this Mentimeter. I think it's the same one, right, Ines, that you had opened before, so it should work, continuing with it. And the first question that we have is very much related to the practices in communication and the needs, communication needs. It actually relates to some questions that we have had, and very much to the presentation of Vera. That's why I'm not going to explain anything on this slide, but this slide only wanted to reflect that there are different needs. Some people look for data, numbers, some people look for explanations, other people for graphs, other people for perhaps cartoons that are more, or storytelling that is more effective, and so on. And we want to know from you the answer to this question, which is there any information, or it can be a piece of information or utility, that you miss when you are creating communication pieces? You can select different answers here. So either an easier access to the data and the methods to work with this data, or perhaps you need the availability of information that is less technical and easier to understand. Then we have another option, which is more effective methods for creating visualizations, recommendations of data sources, or more authoritative and trustworthy sources, and so on. And then I would like to ask Vera, because you didn't have, none of you had the chance to answer any question, but this particular one, I think it's very related to your presentation, to comment on these results and perhaps give your point of view. Yeah, so we see that people voted for more effective methods for creating data visualizations. Does it make sense? Also for you, is it your case from the cases you know about in the European Journalism Center? Or would you say it's more other types of needs that are important?
Yeah, I think that that is an exact answer, let's say, right? Access to effective methods for creating data visualizations are not, in a way, it's not easy to come about, right? When you start searching online, there are actually a lot of free tools that allow you to do data visualization. And I have to say that with AI, this number of free tools has grown a lot. And you have, I can give an example, like Data Wrapper, for example. If you go online, you go on Data Wrapper, you can easily create data visualizations. Canva, for example, it's another tool that many journalists love. If you are not a designer by trade, or you're not trained in designing visuals, Canva can really help. I mean, it has transformed my my abilities, you know, to do presentations, to do visualizations. It's a fantastic tool. And the free side, because of course, if you want upgraded elements on the tool, you can pay, but what is available for free is very good already.
Okay, thanks. Then we will move to the next topic, and I will give the floor to my colleague Kevin to present you about standardization of communication practices. Kevin, you need to unmute yourself. We cannot hear you.
Oh, yes. No? I'm sorry. The typical unmute. I'm Kevin Ramirez from ClimateKick. I'd just like to present this question on communication and how standardization practices have already been used to a certain extent on how we communicate about climate change. And I think this briefly touch upon some elements that have already been discussed. So it's a little bit of what has already been said. If you go to the next, I think I put animations. So the first one was using consistent terminology. And I think that based on the example of Vera, in which the Guardian moved from using climate crisis. In this case, it's also an example of avoiding using climate debate. It's not anymore a debate. It's a climate emergency, it's a climate crisis. And I think we see in the different media outlets are already positioning the communication in that direction, so that we leave apart that the discussion about is it true or real, and we're just saying it's a crisis. If you go to the next one. And then another element we see when it comes to standardization communication is the use of reports from reliable sources. One very reliable source is the IPCC set of reports. We move to the next one. And then again, as previously discussed, we see that a lot of the graphs, and I think there's also highlighted by Vladimir, that they tell a story. Sometimes a graph or short video of what happened in a territory from one period to the next is a really telling instrument to make people understand the effects of climate change. And another element that also we can see some sort of standardization is the use of ethical guidelines, and in this case is a type of guidelines reported or produced by the Society of Environmental Journalists. They put guidelines to support effective communication on the topic. So now we can go directly to the next question. So the question is, which aspects are the most important to standardize, in this case, having some sort of governance or guidelines when communicating climate topics to non-experts? So the idea here is that you give a rating to the different options that you find. So you can go from 0 to 10. I also will vote myself. And then I guess when we have around 20 answers or so, we can give the floor to Vladimir and Vera to give a little bit of a context of what we're seeing in terms of the responses we're getting. Yeah, I think we already have some trends there. So maybe we can start with Vladimir with a quick comment on what you're seeing in terms of the results.
Okay. I'm not sure in terms of this, but it's complex as many other things. But I even think that this terminology and language, the glossaries of standardized terms, I think it's really important to have this kind of information. Sometimes I use this kind of informal communication of climate change. I use that to try to help people to better understand something which is for us common, but they don't really understand what is behind that words, like a global surface temperature. Okay, what it really means. It's really complicated thing. It's not easy. It's not really temperature of the surface. It's combination of the temperature of the sea and the air close to the ground, etc. So in that sense, I think that also communication of climate change should be communication of this terminology and what some terms really means and what is behind these terms. So I think that this terminology is really important.
Thank you, Vladimir. And Vera, what are your thoughts based on how the answers have developed?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think terminology and language that ranks second, right? It's something that is very, very important for the media, for journalists, science communicators, right? But the way that is communicated to people, instead of telling people to use this language, specific language, right? I think that discussion is more within the industry, because when it comes to talking to the general public, it's more about using the language over and over again and making sure that all the media outlets agree on that. And most of the climate journalists or communicators agree on that, right? Because the use of it over time, continuous use, reinforces a certain idea, right, in people's imagery of climate change and understanding of climate change. So it's very funny because I see a lot of the content creators on social media making a lot of videos about this, actually. So not so much about terminology, but they explain what the language behind climate change means. And they break down the language so that people understand. And often the video is just about that. They pick a term from science or climate change, and they break down the term and explain to people exactly what it is about.
Thank you, Vera. Back to you, Marta.
Okay, thanks a lot for your comments, and we will go to the last topic now, which will be introduced by Anne-Marie Groth.
Marta, somehow I cannot start my video, so maybe you have to unlock something.
Okay. Yeah, while Ines is looking into that, if you want to at least start explaining the slide.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Thank you. My name is Anne-Marie Groth, and I'm working with Wageningen Environmental Research. Wageningen Environmental Research is a partner in Climateurope2. This topic is about uncertainty, communication and visualization of uncertainty in climate change. I think Vera pointed out already, it's an important topic. There's quite some research being carried out on these topics, and organizations such as Climate Outreach discusses regularly good and bad practices on their website. Uncertainties are everywhere, yet crucial decisions are still being made. Organizations trade in the currency of uncertainty, and investment decisions are taken based on imperfect knowledge. And just like any area of science, uncertainty is a feature of climate change. It will never go away. However, experience shows that uncertainty in climate change is often used as a kind of excuse for not taking any decision. As I said, there is quite some research ongoing in the field of communication of uncertainty in climate change. And it appears, for example, that wording does matter a lot. I think it also has been mentioned by Vera. So it seems to be more effective in terms of reaching out to the general public if we shift from talking in terms of uncertainty to risk. Moreover, climate communicators need to realize that certain terms like uncertainty or bias have different meanings for scientists and the general public. Visualization of uncertainty is also subject of multiple studies. On the right side of this slide, you see an example in the 6th assessment report of IPCC, and there you see that IPCC is making use of different scenarios and ranges to visualize uncertainties. Let's go to the Mentimeter questions, Marta.
Okay, Anne-Marie, you can activate your camera if you wish now.
Yeah. Okay, what challenges do you experience when communicating uncertainty in climate information? Is it about explaining how climate models work and their limitations, or using the right wording to convey uncertainty in climate change? Selecting the best way to provide uncertainty information, for instance, ranges, probabilities, or most likely categories. Switch the focus from uncertainty to certainty, or other. What do you see as the major challenges? Looking forward to see your responses. Okay. I don't see any new responses coming in. Maybe I give the floor to Vera. Could you give your comments on the results? Do you recognize the results?
Yes, I do. I think I voted precisely with this scale that the results show. So definitely, I think that from the media and the journalists and the communicator standpoint, using the right wording to convey uncertainty is really challenging. And someone actually asked the question in the chat that had to do with that, right? When polarization is so strong, when you don't want to alarm people, but you need to convey the risks and the uncertainty, right? It's really difficult to choose your words. It's really challenging to frame the entire narrative in the right way. And then you have to include solutions, but you also have to cover the problems, and you have to go local, and you have to go global, right? We talked about all this, but it's a lot of criterias that we need to take into account, and the wording is transversal to all of this. So it's at the core of what communicators do. So for me, this is the biggest challenge, more so than explaining climate models, how they work and their limitations. And I don't have a background in science, right? So one could think that this would be the biggest, but I think that the wording has really became challenging throughout all the tasks that journalists and communicators have to take into account.
Thank you. Vladimir, is there any response that surprises you?
No. I mean, it's when you talk with the general public, I'm not sure that you have like many opportunities or that much time to communicate all this. Okay, but from time to time, the journalists are ready to understand better what is behind this, and in that moment you can talk about all this stuff. In general, my problem with uncertainty is not about this standard uncertainty. I mean, when you were telling that Earth is gonna warm up by 1 degree, that there is uncertainty range going from 0.9 to 1.2 or something else, something like that. My problem with uncertainty communicated with general public is in the moments like this one. Okay, I will use Spain right now, but it's not Spain, it's any other. We had in Bosnia, we had a floods also like 10 days ago. It's a neighbor country to the Serbia also, with like a 20 fatalities there. And you know, when you have this kind of event and you had people died because of the floods, like in Bosnia, and then you have journalists in Serbia asking you about these floods, these floods connected to the climate change? And then you tell them, yeah, it's connected. And then they ask you, so what we can expect in the future? And the only answer that you can give them is that you can expect something worse. And because there is 20 people dead, they can expect more than 20 people dead in the future. And then you need to explain them that if we adapt, maybe we can be better handle this situation. And in that moment, when you said that you can expect worse situation in the future, they start to ask you when we can expect that. And that's it. That is uncertainty. That is my problem, because you can tell, only you can tell them is that in the next 20 years, probably you will have precipitation events with more intensive precipitation in comparison that what you had like a few days ago. Okay, but they insist they insist to know the year, the month, the season, etc. And to explain to them that it's not possible to have this kind of forecast, that you have projection, it's hard. And it takes time, and you need to repeat that several times, that we don't have tools which can tell us, okay, in Serbia in 2032 you will have like a precipitation event which will be more intensive in comparison to this one in Bosnia, etc. Okay, and they need to understand that this risk is like it's spread over the time window, and for me that is the problem. So the general media, in my experience, is that general media does not care too much about this temperature increase 1 degree plus minus 0.5. They don't care about that, but they care about this information, that when they realize you can expect additional climate change in next 30 years, when these extreme events going to happen into the future, and that is also uncertainty, let's say.
Thank you. Over to you, Marta.
Okay, thanks. We have reached the end of this webinar already. It has been 1.5 hours and still it feels a little bit short because we haven't had time to go through all the questions. But before leaving, we would like to thank the speakers, Vladimir and Vera, for generously bringing your perspectives to this webinar. I would also like to thank the audience, especially the ones that still are connected, for your participation and also for ensuring a lively discussion, although we haven't have time to cover all your questions. Before closing, I would like to bring to your attention some of the activities that the project is organizing. You can see them in this list. Of course, we will have other stakeholder perspective webinars in the future, covering different sectors, and then the project is organizing festivals and festival series and a Climate Europe 2 roadshow. If you are interested, you can go to our website and find more information. This QR code is also for those who want to be part of the Climate Europe 2 network. So if you join this network, you will be informed about all these activities and much more. After this webinar, you will also receive a post-webinar survey where we would appreciate your feedback very much. And you will see that at the end of the survey, there is a specific question about a potential training module that Climate Europe 2 is aiming to develop about communicating uncertainty in climate change, very connected to the topic that Anne-Marie has presented. So you can say there, you can state your interest in being involved in the elaboration of this training module in the case it is developed. If we see interest from people, then it will motivate us to do so. So that's it. Thanks again for joining the Climate Europe 2 webinar, and we wish you a very nice rest of the day.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.